Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your curiosity, a whole stack of sources, and we boil it all down into a shortcut to really understanding something important. And today, we're diving into a pretty incredible story. It's about a nation in crisis, its people rising up, and, a democratic experiment unlike almost anything else you've heard of. Just imagine, right? A country facing an economic meltdown so bad, it was actually the biggest in history compared to its size. And how did the people react? Not quietly. No, they came out with pots and pans, making this huge noise that literally shook the government and forced it to resign. So our mission today is to unpack the kitchenware revolution in Iceland. We're not just looking at the 2008 financial crash itself, but also what happened after. The citizen protests, this amazing attempt to crowdsource a whole new constitution. We've dug into academic papers, firsthand accounts from activists, detailed historical records, all sorts of things to give you the clearest, most, engaging picture we can. So yeah, get ready for some surprising details, probably a few aha moments, and a proper deep dive into how this small island nation navigated a truly massive economic storm in its own unique way.
Okay, so to really get the crash, the crepa as they called it, we kind of need to set the scene first, see what led up to it all. It really starts back in 2001. They deregulated the banking sector, and these three big private banks, Kaupthing, Landsbanki, and Glitnir, they just exploded. I mean, their assets grew to over 11 times Iceland's entire GDP and their foreign debt, over 7 times GDP. We're talking about something like 50 billion euros. Just staggering numbers for a small country.
Wow, 11 times GDP. That's an unbelievable amount of leverage. How on earth did they manage that? What was fueling it?
Well, a lot of it was easy access to international money to credit. Plus, they attracted huge amounts of overseas deposits. You might remember things like Landsbanki's IceSave accounts, offering high interest rates online.
Yeah, I do remember IceSave. So foreign money flooding in.
Exactly. And the Icelandic krona itself, back in early 2007, was ranked by The Economist's Big Mac Index as the most overvalued currency in the world. Now, to try and control inflation, which was running high, Iceland's central bank kept interest rates really steep, like 15.5%.
15.5%.
Okay.
Yeah. But the unintended consequence was that this encouraged something called carry trading. Basically, foreign investors borrow money cheap elsewhere, say in yen, and invest it in high-interest krona to pocket the difference. So this flood of capital chasing those high returns just pumped the bubble up even more. It looked like a boom, but it was incredibly fragile.
Okay, so you've got this hugely inflated financial sector, totally reliant on foreign debt, high interest rates attracting speculative money. It sounds like a house of cards. What happened when the global financial crisis finally hit in 2008? How did Iceland cope?
Cope is maybe not the right word. The impact was immediate and devastating. Trust in those big Icelandic banks, it just vanished almost overnight. By September 2008, the krona had already lost over 35% of its value against the euro. And the banks, they suddenly couldn't refinance all that short-term debt they'd taken on. They just started to collapse.
And the central bank couldn't step in. I mean, isn't that what central banks are for, a lender of last resort? Normally, yes. But here, the Central Bank of Iceland was tiny compared to these banks. They were literally multiples larger than the entire national economy. It just didn't have the resources. It couldn't possibly act as a lender of last resort for institutions that big. They were, too big to save for Iceland.
Right. Too big to save. That's when things got really public, really fast. I remember the headlines, especially from the UK, around early October 2008. People were getting nervous. Wasn't there that famous quote from the BBC's Robert Peston about their debt insurance? Something about financial BO.
Yeah, that's the one. He said it was the worst case of financial BO I've encountered in some time. A pretty pungent way to put it. The international markets could smell the trouble.
Definitely. Then on October 6th, the Prime Minister, Geir Hard, gave that speech to the nation, the one ending, "God bless Iceland." That sounded ominous.
It really did. And things moved incredibly quickly after that. Emergency laws were rushed through Parliament. This gave the Financial Supervisory Authority, the FME, the power to, take over the banks, and crucially, to prioritize domestic deposits, protect Icelandic savers first.
So they nationalized them? Or?
Sort of. Glitnir was initially set for nationalization, but then Landsbanki and Glitnir were put into receivership. And then came that really controversial move by the UK government, freezing Landsbanki's UK assets using anti-terrorism laws.
Anti-terrorism laws. Wow. Iceland must have been furious.
They call it an unfriendly act, which is diplomatic language for, yes, furious. Kaupthing, the last of the big three, collapsed soon after its UK arm declared in default, too. It was just dominoes falling.
In the stock market.
Frozen. for days.
Yeah.
When it finally reopened on October 14th, the main index just cratered, down about 77% immediately. But if you look at it from the peak in 2007, measured in krona, it's down a staggering 93%.
93% just wiped out.
Pretty much. The sheer scale and speed of it all,
Yeah.
still hard to fully comprehend.
So this wasn't just a banking crisis anymore. This was total economic meltdown. What did that actually mean for ordinary people living in Iceland?
Oh, the impact was huge and immediate. Iceland plunged into a really deep recession. GDP dropped 10% between 2007 and 2010. The krona obviously collapsed. Foreign currency, you basically couldn't get it. Transactions were suspended. Unemployment more than tripled in just a few months. And for individuals, well, pension funds lost maybe 15, 25% of their value. Mortgages, loans, many were indexed to foreign currencies or inflation, so payments just skyrocketed. It hit people directly in their wallets, their homes, their future plans. Real hardship.
Okay, so the economy's wrecked. People's savings are evaporating. There's this sense of, well, betrayal. What was the spark? What pushed people from just being angry and worried into actual full-blown protest? Into the Kitchenware Revolution?
Well, protests had already started, actually. Back in October 2008, it began quite small, with one activist, Herder Torfason, just standing outside Parliament with an open mic. That grew into regular Saturday rallies. People were showing up, but it was mostly, fairly orderly, maybe some eggs thrown, some toilet paper, standard protest stuff.
Right, simmering discontent. But not yet a revolution. What was the tipping point?
The real final straw, as people called it, seems to have been January 20th, 2009. The government had been on a 3-week Christmas break.
A 3-week break while the country was collapsing.
Exactly. And when they finally came back to Parliament, what was on the agenda for their first day back?
Please don't say something trivial.
Debating smoking areas in restaurants and whether or not to sell alcohol in shops.
You're kidding. While the financial system was in ruins.
That's what the reports say. And for the public watching this, it just showed this massive, unforgivable disconnect, this immense gulf, as one source put it, between the politicians and the reality people were living.
Wow. Yeah, I can see how that would just ignite things. That level of perceived indifference, maybe.
Or contempt, even. That's how it felt to many. It crystallized all the anger. It showed the people in charge just didn't get it or maybe didn't care. And that's often the spark, isn't it? That feeling that your leaders are completely out of touch, it turns anger into action.
It certainly seems like it did here. So, January 20th, 2009, the politicians are debating smoking areas. How did people react? How did the kitchenware revolution actually start?
It started almost immediately. That day, people just started gathering outside the Parliament building.
Yeah.
Tens at first, then hundreds, then thousands, day after day. And they brought, well, anything they could find to make noise. Saucepans, pots, frying pans, spoons, whistles, whatever kitchen stuff they had.
Just banging them together.
Constantly. The idea was to create this inescapable noise, this cacophony, to literally disrupt the politicians inside, to make it impossible for them to ignore the people outside. It was a very audible, very public rejection.
And it wasn't just noise, right? Things got more intense. There were clashes.
Yes, between January 20th and 22nd particularly, things escalated. Sources described them as riots. There were clashes with riot police, pepper spray was used, batons. People got arrested, injured. Protesters were throwing things at the Parliament building, Scar, that Icelandic yogurt stuff, snowballs, eggs, paint, but also fireworks, shoes, even rocks and paving stones, apparently.
Paving stones. Okay, so it got serious.
Yeah, and on the 22nd, the police used tear gas, which was a really big deal in Iceland. It hadn't been used since way back in 1949 during an anti-NATO protest, so it showed the level of confrontation.
Amidst all that chaos, what were people actually demanding? What did they want?
The core demands were really clear. 1, the prime minister and the whole government had to resign immediately. 2, the heads of the central bank and the financial supervisory authority, they had to go too. And 3, new elections, a clean slate.
Get rid of the old guard, start fresh.
Pretty much. And this tactic, the pot banging, the cacerolazo, they'd seen it used elsewhere, like in Argentina. It's fascinating, isn't it? Taking ordinary household items and turning them into weapons of protest. It showed this emotionally well-channeled activism. Intense, yes, confrontational at times, definitely. But sources stress it wasn't about widespread violence. It felt more like a collective defense, a fight for well-being, using noise as the main weapon.
A collective defense using kitchenware.
Yeah.
It's quite an image. So, did it work? Did all that noise and pressure actually achieve those demands? Well, incredibly quickly, yes. On January 23rd, just days after those major clashes, Prime Minister Gerhard announced he was resigning. He cited health reasons, but also said he wouldn't run in the next election.
So the first demand met almost immediately.
Exactly. Then, just 2 days later, the Commerce Minister, Björn Sigurðsson, he resigned too, and he explicitly said he was taking responsibility for the crisis.
Wow. Accountability, that's often missing in these situations.
It felt significant. And then the final piece fell into place on January 26th. The whole ruling coalition collapsed. Hard officially handed in the government's resignation to the president.
Just like that. The pot banging worked.
It seemed to. It led directly to a new interim government being formed by February 1st. A minority coalition, this time left-wing, the Social Democratic Alliance and the Left-Green Movement. And Iceland got its first female prime minister, Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir, a huge shift.
A really huge shift.
That
And
was-
a demand for new elections.
That happened quickly, too. They were held on April 25th, 2009, and the results were, well, revolutionary in their own way. The Independence Party, which had basically run Iceland for 18 years, they took a massive hit. The Social Democrats and especially the Left Greens won a majority together. And get this, there's a brand new party, the Citizens Movement, formed literally out of the January protests. They won 4 seats in parliament.
Ordinary citizens protesting 1 month, sitting in parliament just a few months later. That's remarkable.
Isn't it? It was a complete shakeup of a political system that had been incredibly stable, some might say stagnant, for decades. What does that tell you, looking back?
It tells you that, yes, sometimes direct citizen action can force fundamental change. The old parties were clearly discredited. People wanted something different. And forces like the Left Greens, who were seen as outside the establishment that oversaw the crash, they benefited massively. It really showed a direct, powerful link between people mobilizing on the streets and shifting political power. It wasn't just symbolic.
But the story doesn't end there, does it? The Kitchenware Revolution wasn't just about kicking out the old government. There was this incredibly ambitious, almost unique plan to rewrite the entire constitution.
Right, and this is where Iceland's response gets really fascinating, maybe even pioneering. You see, the constitution they had dated back to 1944 when they got independence from Denmark. It was basically the Danish constitution with king crossed out and president written in. It was always meant to be temporary, but they just never got around to replacing it.
So after the crash, people thought, okay, now's the time.
Exactly. There was this feeling that the old rules, the old system had failed. And the new government, pushed by citizen groups and that general mood for change, actually supported a process to draft a completely new constitution from the ground up. The idea was pretty radical. Flip the usual logic. Instead of the state telling society how things are, let society, the citizens, take the lead in defining the rules. Put citizenship first.
Putting citizens in charge of writing the Constitution, how did they even begin to do that? It sounds incredibly complex. They started with something called national forums, Fundur. The first one was in November 2009. They got 1,500 people together, and importantly, most of them were randomly selected from the National Registry, like jury duty, but for designing your country's future, and they streamed it all online.
Random selection, that's key. So it wasn't just the usual suspects, the politically connected.
Right. They held a second one in November 2010, this time government-backed, with 950 randomly chosen people. And they talked about big stuff. Fundamental values. Who should own natural resources like fishing quotas, making the government more accountable, spreading power out, protecting the environment. Really foundational questions.
It sounds like a massive national conversation, trying to build consensus from the grassroots up. A very deliberative approach, using dialogue to figure out the way forward.
Definitely. So after these big discussions, how did they actually turn that into a draft constitution? Well, the next step was supposed to be electing a constitutional assembly. 25 people, specifically chosen because they weren't affiliated with political parties. That election happened in November 2010. But then there was a snag. The Supreme Court actually invalidated the election results in January 2011, said there were procedural problems with how it was run.
Oh, so that was the end of it.
You'd think so, right? But no. Parliament did something really bold. They basically said, okay, the election had flaws, but we like the idea and we like these people. So they just appointed the same 25 individuals to a constitutional council.
Wow, okay, a pragmatic workaround.
Exactly. And this council then had this monumental task. Draft a whole new constitution. And they had just 4 months to do it, from April to July 2011.
4 months. That's incredibly fast for something so fundamental. How did they manage the process, and how did they keep the public involved after those initial forums?
This is where it got really innovative, especially for the time. They went all in on transparency and participation using the internet. They put drafts online. They used Facebook, Twitter, Flickr. They posted videos of their meetings on YouTube. They actively asked for feedback. People could email in suggestions, even send handwritten notes.
So it wasn't just 25 people in a room. They were trying to keep that conversation going with the whole country.
Absolutely. There's even an example where Article 14 of the final draft apparently came directly from public suggestions submitted online. They were genuinely trying to crowdsource it.
That's remarkable. A real attempt at dialogic management,
Right.
using digital tools to foster collective intelligence. It's that radical humanism, again, trusting people to contribute meaningfully to their own governance.
So what were some of the key ideas in this crowdsourced draft? What kind of changes were they proposing? Some really significant ones, focused on empowering citizens. They proposed giving voters the right to trigger national referendums. Like if 10% of voters signed a petition, they could force a vote on a law already passed by Parliament, or just 2% of voters could put an issue forward for Parliament to discuss. And 10% could even propose a bill directly. Real direct democracy tools.
That would fundamentally change the relationship between politicians and the public, wouldn't it?
Completely. The final draft was unanimously approved by the Council. It went to Parliament. And then they held a non-binding advisory referendum in October 2012. About 2/3 of the voters who turned out approved the draft as the basis for a new constitution.
So it had public backing, but you mentioned earlier it wasn't fully ratified. What happened? Why didn't this groundbreaking document become law?
Yeah, that's the somewhat disappointing epilogue to that part of the story. Despite the Council's work and the referendum result, the draft ultimately got stalled in Parliament. The political momentum shifted. The urgency of the crisis faded a bit. The established parties perhaps weren't so keen on such radical changes to their power. There were also lingering legal debates about the process, given the Supreme Court's earlier ruling. So while it was an incredible experiment in democratic innovation, a real-world test of social management, putting citizens first, it ultimately didn't cross the finish line into law. The political system, perhaps, wasn't quite ready to absorb such a fundamental bottom-up change. A fascinating experiment, even if incomplete. But the constitutional process wasn't the only example of direct democracy or accountability in action, was it? You mentioned the IceSave debts earlier.
Right. That's another key part of the story. The government actually negotiated deals with the UK and the Netherlands to repay the huge losses from those IceSave accounts. But they put those deals to the people in referendums.
And the people said,
No. Resoundingly no. Twice. In March 2010 and again in April 2011, the first time, something like 93% of voters rejected the deal.
93%. So the public basically overruled the government on a major international financial agreement.
Pretty much. It showed real popular power, a willingness to defy international pressure and what their own leaders had agreed to.
And what about holding individuals accountable? The bankers, the politicians, did anything happen there?
Yes, although the results were mixed. As we mentioned, former Prime Minister Gerhard was actually indicted by Parliament for negligence. He was tried before this special court, the Landsdomer, which hadn't met since 1905.
Tried the former prime minister. That's huge.
It was unprecedented. In the end, he was found guilty on only one minor charge, basically, not holding enough formal cabinet meetings as the crisis unfolded. He didn't receive any punishment, but the trial itself sent a powerful signal. Separately, there was an Office of the Special Prosecutor set up to investigate financial crimes related to the crash, and they did get results. By January 2018, they had secured 13 guilty verdicts against bankers and financiers for things like market manipulation, fraudulent loans, so some measure of legal accountability was achieved.
Okay, so we've seen the crash, the revolution, the political upheaval, the constitutional experiment, the referendums, the trials. It's an incredible sequence of events. Looking back now, what's the lasting impact? What's the so-called Icelandic miracle that people sometimes talk about?
Well, the miracle narrative is partly about the economic recovery, which was actually quite remarkable, especially compared to some other crisis-hit European countries. Iceland's finances started improving steadily from around 2011. It was a mix of things. Those emergency laws helped cushion the initial blow. They did implement an IMF program, which meant painful austerity tax hikes, spending cuts. But crucially, they also kept those capital controls in place for years.
Right, stopping money from flooding out of the country. That was controversial, but seemed to work.
It seemed to give them breathing room. It allowed the devalued krona to make their exports, like fish, really competitive. And it helped Iceland avoid getting dragged into the wider Eurozone sovereign debt crisis.
Yeah.
By mid-2012, Iceland was already being hailed as a recovery success story. Growth was back, unemployment was falling.
And didn't tourism take off around then, too? I remember the volcano, Ivab
That's the one. The 2010 eruption, while disruptive at the time, paradoxically put Iceland on the map for many people. Stunning pictures went global. Then you had shows like Game of Thrones filming there, showcasing those dramatic landscapes. So yeah, a massive tourism boom definitely helped inject foreign cash and fuel the recovery.
So a combination of tough measures, unique policies like capital controls, currency devaluation, and maybe a bit of luck with volcanoes and dragons.
Uh, Something like that on the economic side. But I think connecting it back to the bigger picture, the miracle, if you want to call it that, wasn't just economic. It was also about that democratic regeneration. It showed how this, small and resilient country with people who were really connected to small place, high internet use, could actually channel all that anger from the crash into real change. The focus on nonviolent protest, the demands for accountability, the investigations, that whole constitutional process, it demonstrated a society willing to think critically, to question everything, and to try and build something better. It's a story about holding power accountable and trying to learn from disaster.
So not just getting the economy back on track, but fundamentally trying to fix the system that broke in the first place, making sure the knowledge gained wasn't wasted.
Exactly. Applying the lessons learned to reshape the future. That's perhaps the deeper legacy.
What an incredible deep dive indeed. From financial ruin to banging pots and pans, forcing a government out, and then trying to literally rewrite the rules of the country, Iceland's story is just so unique.
It really is. And maybe the question for you, the listener, is what can we take away from this? Are there elements of Iceland's journey, that use of digital tools, that commitment to collective nonviolent action, the demand for real accountability that could inspire responses in our own communities when we face challenges or crises of trust?
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? That even when things seem completely broken, the collective will of ordinary people, expressed with creativity and persistence, can genuinely change a nation's path. It leaves you thinking, if this small island nation could face its crisis head-on, demand such deep changes, and try to rebuild trust from the ground up, what power do we all have in our own communities to redefine things when they go wrong? Maybe sometimes small is beautiful because change feels possible. A really provocative thought to end on.